Nero Wolfe and the Phantom Frequency. It was a Monday in October, one of those crisp autumn evenings when Manhattan pretends it has seasons, and I was in Nero Wolfe's office doing what passes for work in my line, catching up on correspondence, filing reports, and generally maintaining the illusion that a private detective's life involves paperwork rather than mayhem. The brownstone was quiet. Upstairs in the plant rooms on the roof, Wolfe was with his orchids, his nightly ritual from 9 to 11, sacred and inviolable. Fritz Brenner was in the kitchen, probably reading one of his French cookbooks or polishing something that didn't need polishing, and scattered throughout the house, like well-armed sentries, were the 5 Dobermans that had become as much a part of Wolfe's household as the beer in his refrigerator or the 7,000 orchids blooming above our heads. Caesar, the alpha and Wolfe's particular favorite, lay near the door to Wolfe's office, his massive head resting on his paws but his eyes alert. Mars prowled the hallway, his proud bearing and low growl enough to make any would-be intruder reconsider their life choices. Apollo circled near the windows, sharp-eyed and restless, constantly scanning for threats. Minerva, the patient strategist, had stationed herself near the kitchen where she could observe both the front entrance and the back stairs, and Diana, the youngest and swiftest, dozed near the red leather chair, though one ear remained pitched forward, monitoring sounds I couldn't hear. The dogs had been Wolfe's idea, his concession to the fact that we'd made enemies over the years, and some of those enemies had long memories and longer reach. He'd acquired them 6 months ago, trained them personally with a patience he rarely showed to humans, and integrated them into the household with the same meticulous care he devoted to his orchids. They ate on schedule, exercised on schedule, and obeyed with a discipline that made the Swiss look casual. The brownstone itself had changed too. The windows were now bulletproof, installed after an incident last spring that I preferred not to think about. The doors were reinforced steel behind their mahogany facades. The mirror in the front hall was bulletproof glass, as were the various decorative pieces Fritz had chosen for their aesthetic value and Wolfe had approved for their defensive capabilities. Even the glasses in which Wolfe drank his beer were made of a special hardened crystal that could, theoretically, stop a small-caliber bullet. We'd become a fortress, though Wolfe would never use such a crude term. He preferred prudently secured. I was contemplating whether to file the Hendricks report under H for Hendricks or C for concluded when the doorbell rang at 9:47 p.m. Fritz appeared in the office doorway before I could rise, his face showing that hairline fracture of concern that suggested our visitor wasn't selling magazine subscriptions. In the hall, Caesar's deep bark resonated like distant thunder, and I heard the click of Diana's claws as she moved to investigate. "Archie," Fritz said quietly, "there is a gentleman at the door. He appears extremely agitated." He gave his name as Mr. Tobias Render, and said, Fritz paused, choosing his words carefully, that it is a matter of life and death and that he has cash. The magic words. Wolfe's fees were substantial, and while he claimed to work for the intellectual challenge rather than the money, he had an acute appreciation for the finer things in life, all of which required substantial funding. "Mr. Wolfe is with his orchids," I said, stating the obvious. "Yes, I informed the gentleman that Mr. Wolfe could not be disturbed until 11 o'clock. He said he would wait all night if necessary." I glanced at my watch. An hour and 13 minutes until Wolfe descended from his sanctuary. On the other hand, a man desperate enough to wait that long might be desperate enough to cause trouble if left unattended on our doorstep. Put him in the front room, I decided. Give him brandy if he looks like he needs it. Water if he doesn't. I'll go see if I can convince the Oracle to grant an early audience. Fritz nodded and disappeared. I heard him speaking to our visitor in the low, calming tones he usually reserved for people who were either drunk or dangerous, followed by the sound of the front door closing and multiple locks engaging. I took the elevator up to the plant rooms, another recent addition, installed because Wolfe's bulk and his knees were no longer on speaking terms with the stairs. The warm, humid air hit me like a tropical wall as I stepped out into the first of the 4 glass-walled rooms. Theodore Horstman, Wolfe's orchid nurse, was misting a bench of cattleyas and looked up with the vague disapproval of someone whose sanctuary had been invaded. "He's in the warm room," Theodore said before I could ask, "and he won't like being interrupted." "He never does." I found Wolfe in the warmest of the 4 rooms, standing before a bench of Phalaenopsis, his massive form surprisingly graceful as he examined a particular bloom with the intensity most people reserve for their firstborn children. He was wearing his green canvas work apron, and his hands, which could be remarkably delicate when they chose, were adjusting the stake supporting one of the flower spikes. "Archie," he said without looking up, "if the building is on fire, leave me to burn. Otherwise, this had better be important. A potential client named Tobias Render is downstairs in the front room. Fritz says he's shaking like a leaf and claims it's life or death. He's willing to wait until 11, but I thought you might want to make an exception." "Why would I want to do that?" "Because Fritz also mentioned cash, which means Mr. Render isn't interested in payment plans, and because a man desperate enough to show up at our door at 9:45 on a Monday night is probably desperate enough to do something foolish if we make him wait." Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his eyes still on the orchid. Then he sighed, a sound like a tire releasing pressure, and straightened up with the careful deliberation of a man who knows his own weight. "Very well. Tell Theodore I'll be down in 5 minutes, and Archie, have Mr. Render moved to the office. If I'm to be interrupted, I might as well be comfortable while being annoyed." I took the elevator back down and found Fritz in the kitchen, where he was preparing a tray with brandy, water, and 3 of the bulletproof glasses. The man thought of everything. "Mr. Wolfe will see him in 5 minutes," I told him. "Move our guest to the office." Fritz nodded and carried the tray toward the front room. I followed, curious to get a better look at the man who disrupted Wolfe's sacred schedule. Tobias Render was a scarecrow. That was my first impression. Tall, gaunt, with the kind of pallor you get from spending too much time under artificial light and not enough time remembering to eat. He looked to be in his mid-30s, though the shadows under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders could have added a decade. His suit was decent quality but wrinkled, suggesting he'd been wearing it for more than one day. His hands were never still, adjusting his glasses, running through his thinning hair, gripping and releasing the arms of the red leather chair where he'd settled. Diana had followed us into the office, and now sat near the door, her dark eyes fixed on Render with the kind of attention that suggested she was making calculations about threat level and response time. "Mr. Render," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Archie Goodwin. Mr. Wolfe will be down in a moment. Fritz has brought you brandy if you'd like it." His handshake was damp and brief. "Thank you, I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice." "We haven't seen you yet," I pointed out, settling into my desk and pulling out my notebook. "But we will. In the meantime, would you like to give me a preview? It helps if Mr. Wolfe knows what he's getting into before he commits." Render reached for the brandy with shaking hands, took a long swallow, and set the glass down with exaggerated care. "I'm not sure where to begin. The beginning usually works." "The beginning?" He laughed, though there was no humor in it. "The beginning was 3 years ago, or maybe during the war, or possibly last week. It depends on how you measure these things. Try last week. We'll work backward if we need to." He took a breath, visibly steadying himself. "Last week, my research partner died. The police say it was natural causes, cardiac arrest, but I know better. I know what killed him, Mr. Goodwin, and I know that I'm next on the list." Before I could respond, I heard the elevator descending and the soft thud of Wolfe's footsteps in the hall. Caesar rose from his position near the door, tail moving in the slow wag reserved for his master. Wolfe entered the office, glanced at Render with the assessing look of a jeweler, examining a questionable stone, and lowered himself into his custom-made chair behind the desk. The chair groaned. It always groaned. Someday it would give up entirely, and Fritz would commission another one, and the cycle would continue. Wolfe arranged himself, settling his bulk, adjusting his position, placing his hands flat on the desk blotter, and finally raised his eyes to meet Render's. "Mr. Render," he said in that deep, measured voice that could make a shopping list sound like a pronouncement from Olympus, "you have interrupted my evening with my orchids. You have disturbed my household's routine, and you have caused Archie to use the elevator twice in 15 minutes, which wears on the machinery. Justify this disruption, please, and be concise. Verbosity annoys me." Render swallowed. "Mr. Wolfe, someone is killing people with sound, and they're going to kill me next." Wolfe's eyebrows rose perhaps a millimeter, his equivalent of jumping to his feet in astonishment. "Explain," he commanded, and Render did. Tobias Render's story spilled out in fits and starts, like water from a kinked hose. Wolfe sat motionless behind his desk, his eyes half closed in that deceptive pose that meant he was absorbing every word, weighing every nuance, and constructing elaborate theories that he would reveal only when it suited him. I took notes in my personal shorthand, capturing not just the words but the pauses, the tremors in Render's voice, the way his hands kept returning to his brandy glass like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. "I'm a radio engineer," Render began. "Specialized work, high-frequency transmission, acoustic research, mostly for government contracts. During the war I worked on submarine detection systems, using sound waves to locate enemy vessels. After the war I partnered with a man named Dr. Quentin Albrecht. Brilliant physicist, even more specialized than me. We ran a small laboratory in Greenpoint, researching acoustic phenomena for the Navy." "Define acoustic phenomena," Wolfe said, his eyes still closed. "Sound as a tool, sound as a weapon." The Navy was interested in non-lethal incapacitation, using specific frequencies to disorient enemy combatants without causing permanent harm. We were working on prototypes, testing different wavelengths, different amplitudes. It was all theoretical, all controlled. "Continue." 3 weeks ago, Quentin and I were running late-night tests on a new transmitter design. We were scanning the commercial radio frequencies, looking for interference patterns that might affect our equipment. That's when we found it. A signal that shouldn't have been there. Not a broadcast, not a carrier wave, but something else. Something operating on frequencies that were wrong. How? I asked. Render's hands tightened on his glass. Too narrow, too precise. Commercial radio operates in broad bands to carry voice and music. This signal was concentrated, a needle of sound rather than a wave, and it was pulsing, not continuously broadcasting. On for 3 seconds, off for 7, on for 3, off for 7, like a heartbeat. Or a test pattern, Wolfe murmured. Exactly. Quentin became obsessed with it. He started tracking the signal, trying to triangulate its source. He said it matched the theoretical specifications for something we'd heard rumors about during the war, a classified project called Redstone, the Army's attempt to develop acoustic weapons. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "I'm familiar with Redstone. The program was shut down in 1946, declared impractical and too dangerous to pursue." That's what everyone thought. But Quentin believed someone had taken the research private. He spent the next 2 weeks triangulating the signal's source, recording its patterns, analyzing its frequency signature. He said it was operating in a range that could cause physical distress, subsonic and ultrasonic tones that the human ear can't consciously hear, but that the body reacts to. Nausea, disorientation, elevated heart rate, and in sustained exposure, potentially cardiac arrest. "You said your partner is dead," I prompted. Friday night, Quentin called me at home. It was late, after midnight. He said he'd found it, the transmitter's location, somewhere in the industrial district of Brooklyn. He'd also found something else, something that scared him. He wouldn't tell me what, said it was too dangerous to discuss over the phone. He told me to meet him at the lab Saturday morning, that he'd have proof, that we'd take it to the authorities together. Render's voice cracked. He paused, taking another swallow of brandy. "Saturday morning, I got a call from the police. Quentin had been found dead in his apartment, cardiac arrest. The medical examiner said it was natural causes, his heart just stopped. But Mr. Wolfe, Quentin was 34 years old, he ran marathons, he had the heart of an athlete. There's no way he died naturally. Yet the medical examiner certified it as such," Wolfe noted. "Yes, I went to Quentin's apartment that afternoon, told his landlord I was collecting his personal effects for the family. His recording equipment was still there, still running. The tape decks, the oscilloscopes, everything. But the tapes were blank, erased. Not just erased, wiped clean with a degaussing magnet. Someone had been there after he died and destroyed the evidence." "You informed the police of this?" "I tried. They said I was overwrought, that I was seeing conspiracy, where there was only tragedy. They said the equipment might have malfunctioned, that Quentin might have erased the tapes himself before he died. They refused to investigate further." Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming once on the desk blotter, a sign of significant interest. "You mentioned others. You said Quentin was not the only victim." "No." Render reached into his coat and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. "I started researching after Quentin's death, looking for patterns. I found 4 other deaths in the past 3 weeks, all cardiac arrest, all sudden, all involving people in the radio and communications industries." He handed me the clipping. I scanned it quickly. A small article from the back pages of the Times. The kind of thing you'd skip over on your way to the baseball scores. Harriet Calloway, I read aloud, age 41, sound engineer at WMCA radio station, found dead in her sound booth on October 1st. Cardiac arrest, no prior health issues. Keep reading, Render said. Ivan Kowalski, 63, chief technician at Radio City, died October 7th, also cardiac arrest. Margaret Finch, 55, former Signal Corps technician, died October 10th. And Walter Pendergast, 62, owner of Pendergast Communications, died September 28th. I looked up. That's a pattern. It's a hit list, Render said flatly. All of them connected to radio, all of them dying the same way, all of them in a 3-week period. And Mr. Wolfe, there's something else. I did some digging into their backgrounds. Every single one of them worked on classified military communications projects during the war. Different projects, different locations, but they all had security clearances. They all had access to sensitive acoustic research, including your partner, Wolfe said. Yes, Quentin worked at a Navy research facility in Maryland from 1943 to 1945. Classified work. Never talked about it even after the war ended. But now he's dead, and so are all the others. And I... He stopped, his hand going to his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small device, something that looked like a transistor radio with extra dials and a needle gauge on the front. This is a frequency detector, he explained. It picks up electromagnetic signals across a wide spectrum, including frequencies beyond human hearing. I've been carrying it since Quentin died, monitoring for that signal he found. Yesterday afternoon in my apartment, it went wild. He turned a dial, and the needle jumped erratically across the gauge. Someone's broadcasting toward me, Mr. Wolfe. Testing the range, maybe. Calibrating. I've started hearing things, a high-pitched ringing that comes and goes, so faint I sometimes think I'm imagining it. But I know what it means. They're targeting me. They're going to do to me what they did to Quentin and all the others. Who is they? I asked. I don't know. Someone with access to advanced acoustic technology. Someone who knows about the Redstone project. Someone who has a reason to eliminate everyone who worked on military sound research during the war. Wolfe opened his eyes fully and looked at Render with an expression I'd seen before. The look of a man who'd been presented with an interesting puzzle and was already 12 moves ahead of everyone else in the room. Your fee. Mr. Render, what are you prepared to pay for protection and investigation? Anything. I have savings, investments. Name your price. My price is $10,000 if I solve your problem and prevent your death. If I fail, you pay nothing except reasonable expenses. Archie will draw up a contract. Render blinked. That seems too reasonable. It's pragmatic. Dead clients are notoriously difficult to collect from, and I prefer arrangements that incentivize results. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. However, I must warn you that accepting this case means accepting its consequences. If someone is indeed using weaponized sound to commit murder, investigating will make me and everyone in this household a potential target. I do not undertake such risks lightly. I understand. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. You always have choices, Mr. Render. The question is whether you can live with them. Wolfe paused. Or in your case, whether you can live at all without my assistance. Before Render could respond, something changed in the room. It was subtle at first, a pressure in the air, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. Diana's ears pitched forward, and she let out a low whine. Caesar rose to his feet, hackles raised. From the hallway, I heard Mars's growl building from deep in his chest. What? I started. And then I heard it, or felt it, or something in between. A sound that wasn't quite a sound, more like a pressure inside my skull, building and building, high-pitched but not quite audible, like the world's worst case of tinnitus multiplied by 1,000. My vision blurred at the edges, my heart stuttered in my chest, missing a beat, then racing to catch up. Render was on his feet, his frequency detector in hand. The needle had pinned itself to the far right of the gauge, vibrating. It's here, he gasped. They found me. There. Diana collapsed. One moment she was standing, the next she was on her side, legs twitching, a thin line of foam at her mouth. Apollo and Minerva burst into the room, both of them whimpering and shaking their heads violently. Mars stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, that low growl now a continuous rumble of pain and fury. Only Caesar held his ground, though even he looked disturbed, ears flat against his skull, every muscle tensed. The pressure built. My teeth ached. My hands trembled. Across the desk, Wolfe sat perfectly motionless, his face carved from stone, but I could see the strain in his eyes, the whiteness of his knuckles, where his hands gripped the desk blotter. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Diana lay unconscious, but breathing. The other dogs began to calm, though they stayed close together, hackles still raised. Render had dropped his frequency detector and was on his knees, hands over his ears, his face drained of all color. Wolfe sat unmoving for 5 full seconds. Then he spoke, and his voice was very quiet and very cold, the kind of cold that comes from deep places, from fury held under iron control. "Archie, call Saul Panzer. Tell him to come immediately. Then call Dr. Vollmer. Diana needs medical attention. Then call Inspector Kramer and inform him we have a homicide in progress." "Sir?" "Someone just attacked my house. They injured my dog. They threatened my household." His eyes opened, and I'd never seen them quite that shade before, somewhere between obsidian and winter ice. "We are going to find them, Archie, and we are going to stop them, permanently." I'd seen Wolfe angry before. I'd seen him calculating, dismissive, even occasionally moved by genuine emotion. But I'd never seen him like this, cold, implacable fury mixed with something primal and dangerous. Whoever had attacked the brownstone had made a fundamental mistake. They'd miscalculated. They'd hurt something Wolfe cared about. And now they were going to pay for it. I reached for the phone and started making calls. The hunt had begun. Dr. Vollmer arrived within 15 minutes, which was impressive considering he lived in the Bronx and New York traffic. At night could make glaciers look swift. He was a compact man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm competence that made you believe everything would be fine, even when it demonstrably wasn't. He'd been Wolfe's personal physician for years, and he'd seen enough unusual situations in this household that he'd apparently decided not to be surprised by anything anymore. He examined Diana on the floor of Wolfe's office, while the rest of us stood around like anxious relatives in a hospital waiting room. Caesar refused to leave, positioning himself between the doctor and his fallen packmate, watching every movement with those intelligent dark eyes. The other dogs had retreated to various strategic positions around the brownstone, Apollo near the front windows, Mars at the base of the stairs, Minerva in the kitchen doorway, all of them alert, all of them waiting. Her heart rate spiked dramatically, and then crashed, Vollmer said, straightening up from his examination. He was speaking to Wolfe, but his eyes kept flicking to Diana's still form with professional concern. "The pattern is consistent with extreme stress or shock, but there's no obvious cause. No toxins, no physical trauma. It's as if something frightened her system into complete overload." "It did," Wolfe said quietly. "She was exposed to an acoustic weapon, a frequency designed to induce cardiac distress." Vollmer's eyebrows rose. "A what?" "Sound used as a weapon, Doctor. A very specific, very dangerous form of sound that human ears cannot consciously detect, but that the body reacts to on a cellular level. Mr. Render can explain the technical details, but the summary is this. Someone broadcast a frequency into my house that was designed to cause cardiac arrest. Diana was the most vulnerable." "That's..." Vollmer looked between Wolfe and Render and me, apparently trying to decide if we'd all lost our minds simultaneously. "That's not possible. Sound can't..." "It can," Render said quietly. He was still pale, still shaken, but he'd recovered enough to stand and speak coherently. "Subsonic and ultrasonic frequencies can cause physical distress. The military researched it during the war. Most of the programs were shut down because they were too unpredictable, too difficult to control. But in theory, yes, you can kill someone with sound. We nearly had proof tonight." Vollmer looked at Diana again, then back at us. "If that's true, and I'm not saying I believe it, but if it's true, then she's lucky to be alive. Another exposure like that could kill her." "It won't happen again," Wolfe said with absolute certainty. "I'll see to that. What is your prognosis?" "She needs rest, quiet, no stress. Her heart is young and strong, so she should recover. But Mr. Wolfe, if I'm understanding correctly, this wasn't an isolated incident. This was attempted murder." "Of Mr. Render?" "Yes. Diana was collateral damage. Then Mr. Render should be anywhere except here. Actually, Wolfe said, he should be exactly here. This brownstone is now the safest location in Manhattan for anyone targeted by this phantom frequency. We've been attacked once. We know what to expect. We can prepare defenses. Mr. Render's apartment, on the other hand, is a death trap waiting to spring. Fulmer didn't look convinced, but he was a practical man. He packed up his medical bag, left instructions for Diana's care, and departed with the slightly bewildered expression of someone who'd wandered into a situation far stranger than his training had prepared him for. Saul Panzer arrived at 11:30, looking like he'd dressed in 30 seconds and sprinted the entire way from wherever he'd been. Saul was one of those men who could disappear in a crowd of 3 people. Average height, average build, a face so unremarkable you'd forget it while you were looking at it. But behind that forgettable exterior was the sharpest operative in New York, possibly anywhere. When Wolfe needed information found, evidence gathered, or witnesses tracked down, he called Saul. I briefed him in the front room while Wolfe remained in his office with Render, discussing technical details of acoustic weapons that were beyond my comprehension and my interest. Saul listened with that absolute focus he brought to everything, occasionally asking a question, mostly just absorbing information like a very efficient sponge. So someone's killing people with radio waves, he said when I finished. Sound waves, technically, but yes. And you want me to find out who? We want you to find out everything. Who, how, why, and where they're broadcasting from. Wolfe's working the theoretical angle with Render. You're working the practical angle. Canvass the city. Find anyone else who's been affected by unexplained sounds, odd frequencies, or sudden cardiac events in the past month. Pay particular attention to anyone in the radio or communications industries. Money is no object. Saul nodded once. I'll need 24 hours. You've got 12. People are dying. Then I'd better get started. He left without another word. That was Saul. No wasted time, no unnecessary conversation, just results. Inspector Kramer showed up at midnight, looking like someone had dragged him out of bed and then ran over him with a truck for good measure. He probably had been in bed. Kramer was one of those cops who believed in regular hours and normal schedules, which meant that calls from Wolfe's brownstone after dark were about as welcome as a root canal. He came in scowling, smoking one of his cigars, and looking around the office with the expression of a man expecting to find trouble and not being disappointed. All right, Wolfe, he growled, dropping into the red leather chair with complete disregard for the fact that it was specifically positioned for clients and witnesses, not police inspectors. I got a call from Goodwin saying you had a homicide in progress. I don't see any bodies. Start talking before I arrest you for wasting police time. Wolfe had moved Diana to a cushioned bed near his desk, where she was sleeping fitfully under Caesar's watchful guard. The sight of the unconscious Doberman did more to convince Kramer we were serious than any words could have. What happened to the dog? He demanded. She was attacked, Wolfe said, as were we all, though she suffered the most severe effects. Mr. Render, would you explain to the inspector what he witnessed but doesn't yet comprehend? Render went through his story again. The mysterious signal, Albrecht's death, the pattern of cardiac arrests among radio engineers, his own detection of targeting frequencies. Kramer listened with increasing skepticism, his cigar moving from one side of his mouth to the other like a metronome of doubt. Let me get this straight, he said when Render finished. You think someone is killing people with radio waves? Sound waves, I corrected. And he doesn't think it. We know it. We were here, Kramer. We heard it. We felt it. You felt something. Could have been anything. Water pipes. Electrical interference. Coincidence. It was not coincidence, Wolfe interrupted, and his voice had that edge of steel that meant his patience was wearing thin. Inspector, I understand your skepticism. I was skeptical myself until 25 minutes ago, but you are looking at evidence. An unconscious animal, 3 men who experienced simultaneous physiological distress, and equipment that registered a signal not present in normal circumstances. Dismissing this as coincidence is not skepticism, it's willful blindness. Kramer chewed on his cigar, looking at Diana, then at Render's frequency detector sitting on Wolfe's desk, then at me. I gave him my best, I told you so expression, which didn't seem to improve his mood. Even if I believed this, he said finally, what exactly do you want me to do about it? I can't arrest a radio wave. No, But you can investigate the deaths. Calloway, Kowalski, Finch, Pendergast, Albrecht. 5 people dead in 3 weeks, all cardiac arrest, all connected to the radio industry. Pull the autopsy reports, look for patterns, bring in experts to examine the bodies for signs of acoustic trauma. Acoustic trauma. Damage consistent with exposure to extreme sound frequencies. Dr. Vollmer can give you the medical terminology if you require it. Kramer was silent for a long moment, his cigar creating a small cloud of smoke that hung in the air like a very disapproving fog. Finally, he sighed, the sound of a man surrendering to circumstances beyond his control. All right, I'll look into it. I'll pull the files, request additional autopsies if needed, and see if there's any pattern the medical examiners missed. But Wolfe, if this turns out to be some kind of mass hysteria or elaborate hoax, it won't. You're going to owe me more than just an explanation. You'll owe me your cooperation on the next 3 cases I bring you. No complaints, no impossible demands about fees. If I'm wrong, Inspector, you may have my cooperation on the next 6 cases. If I'm right, you'll be too occupied arresting a murderer to collect. Kramer stood, his expression suggesting he wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or worried. Probably both. I'll be in touch. And Goodwin? Yeah. Keep your head down. If someone's really targeting people with this phantom frequency thing, you're in the line of fire now too. Noted. After Kramer left, Wolfe sat in silence for a full 5 minutes, a long time when you're waiting for a genius to finish processing information and start issuing commands. The brownstone had settled into its nighttime rhythms, though tonight those rhythms felt different. Tenser, like the house itself was holding its breath. Finally, Wolfe opened his eyes. Mr. Render, you will remain here tonight. Archie will show you to the south room on the 2nd floor. Tomorrow morning, you will provide me with a detailed technical explanation of how this weapon functions, its theoretical range, its power requirements, and any defensive measures that might protect against it. I want to know everything. Yes, sir. Archie, tomorrow you will make 3 visits. First, to Dr. Albrecht's laboratory in Greenpoint. I want to know what he was working on, what equipment he had, and whether anything has been disturbed since his death. Second, to the last known address of Walter Pendergast's business. Find out who cleaned out his shop after he died, and where his equipment went. Third, to Radio City. Speak with whoever replaced Ivan Kowalski, and determine what, if anything, he left behind. Looking for what, specifically? Connections. Someone knew all these people. Someone had access to their locations, their frequencies, their vulnerabilities. Someone coordinated these deaths with precision and purpose. Find the thread that connects them. And if I get targeted while I'm out there asking questions, then you'll die, and I'll find another assistant. He paused. Archie, don't die. You're difficult to replace. That's the closest thing to sentiment I've heard from you in months. I'm touched. Don't be vulgar. I showed Render upstairs, made sure he had everything he needed. Towels, soap, a phone extension that connected to the front desk in case he needed anything during the night, and gave him Fritz's schedule for breakfast. The brownstone ran on Swiss precision, and meals were served at specific times, whether you wanted them or not. When I came back downstairs, Wolfe was still in his office. Diana had been moved closer to his chair, and he was sitting with one massive hand resting on her head, his expression unreadable. She's going to be fine, I said. This time, they won't get another chance. Won't they? He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd rarely seen before. Genuine concern mixed with cold calculation. Archie, someone has weaponized sound. They've turned something as ubiquitous as radio waves into an instrument of murder. Every house in this city has a radio. Every building has electrical wiring. Every street has transmission towers. If this technology exists, if it can be deployed remotely, then nowhere is truly safe. Including here. Especially here. We've made ourselves targets by accepting this case. By surviving tonight's attack, whoever is responsible knows we're investigating, knows we're a threat. They'll come again. Then we'd better solve this fast. Indeed, he was quiet for a moment, his hand still on Diana's head. When I chose to keep dogs, I understood I was taking on responsibility for their welfare. They depend on me for everything: food, shelter, protection. Tonight I failed in that protection. Diana suffered because I underestimated our enemy. You didn't fail. She's alive. Barely. And next time, if there is a next time, we may not be so fortunate." His voice hardened. "I do not intend to allow a next time, Archie. We're going to find whoever is responsible for this, and we're going to end their campaign of murder. Not for justice, not for the fee, but because they attacked my home. They hurt my dog, and that is unforgivable." I'd seen Wolfe motivated by money, by intellectual curiosity, by moral outrage, and occasionally by sheer stubborn refusal to admit defeat. But I'd never seen him motivated by vengeance. It was unsettling, and in a strange way, reassuring. Because when Nero Wolfe committed himself to something with that kind of focused fury, heaven help anyone who stood in his way. I went to bed that night with my .38 on the nightstand, my door locked, and Apollo sleeping across the threshold, like a very large, very alert doorstop. The brownstone was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels temporary, the eye of a storm, the pause between thunder and lightning. Somewhere out in the city, someone was sitting at a transmitter, adjusting dials, targeting frequencies, preparing to kill again. Tomorrow we were going hunting, and this time, the hunters would be hunted. I started Wednesday morning breaking my own rule about avoiding certain days, but the calendar doesn't care about narrative convenience, with coffee that could strip the enamel off your teeth, and Fritz's cheese omelette, which managed to be both fluffy and substantial enough to serve as a foundation for a small building. Render joined me at the breakfast table, looking like he'd spent the night wrestling with demons and losing. Dark circles under his eyes, a tremor in his hands when he reached for his coffee, but at least he'd slept. "How do you feel?" I asked, because someone had to make conversation, and Fritz was busy at the stove pretending not to listen to everything we said. "Like I've been hit by a truck." Render sipped his coffee carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter him. "But alive, which is more than I expected when I went to sleep. The brownstone has that effect. You come in thinking you're done for, you leave wondering what all the fuss was about." "Assuming I leave." "You will. Wolfe doesn't lose cases. It's bad for his reputation." Wolfe himself appeared at precisely 8 o'clock, descended from his morning session with the orchids. Even during crises, the man maintained his schedule with the inflexibility of the tides, and settled into his place at the breakfast table. Fritz served him the same cheese omelette, with a side of crispy bacon and 3 newspapers arranged in his preferred order: Times, Tribune, and Gazette. We ate in silence, which was Wolfe's preference. The man treated meals as a form of meditation, and interrupting him while he was eating was roughly equivalent to kicking a sleeping bear. Render looked like he wanted to ask questions, but I caught his eye and shook my head. Later. Always later with Wolfe. At 8:45, after Wolfe had finished his breakfast and was deep in the second newspaper, Saul Panzer called. "I've got names," he said without preamble. Saul didn't believe in small talk, which was one of many reasons Wolfe appreciated him. 9 additional deaths in the past 6 weeks, all cardiac arrest, all previously healthy victims, all connected to radio or communications work. I'm compiling full dossiers, but here's the summary. All of them worked on classified military projects during the war. Not the same projects, but there's overlap. They were all part of a network. I relayed this to Wolfe, who had set down his newspaper and was listening with that intense focus that meant he was assembling pieces in that remarkable brain of his. "Names," Wolfe commanded. Saul rattled them off, and I wrote them down. Bernard Hutchins, Angela DeMarco, Frank Grissom, Patricia O'Donnell, Raymond Fletcher, Donald Yates, Millicent Park, Jerome Wu, and Charlotte Brennan. A cross-section of New York, different ages, different backgrounds, different specializations, but all of them engineers, all of them connected to military acoustic research, and all of them dead. "I found something else," Saul continued. 2 of the victims, Hutchins and Fletcher, worked together at a classified facility in Maryland during the war, Fort Meade. When I dug into Fort Meade's wartime activities, I found references to something called the Redstone Subsidiary Program. That's all I could get. Everything else is still classified. But Mr. Wolfe should know that at least 3 of our other victims also had connections to Fort Meade. "What was Fort Meade working on?" I asked. "Officially, communication security. Unofficially, according to one former employee I tracked down, who was willing to talk after I bought him 4 whiskeys, they were developing acoustic weapons, sound bombs, sonic disruptors, frequency-based incapacitation devices. All very hush-hush, all shut down at the end of the war." Wolfe's eyes were closed now, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the tablecloth. Fort Meade, Redstone, acoustic weapons. The pattern is clear. Someone is eliminating everyone who worked on that program. The question is why now, and why this method? Maybe, Render said quietly, because they finally figured out how to make it work. We all looked at him. The Redstone program failed, he continued, or at least that's what the official report said. The acoustic weapons were too unstable, too power-hungry, too difficult to aim. You needed massive generators and precise targeting equipment, but if someone solved those problems, miniaturized the technology, improved the power efficiency, developed better targeting systems, then you'd have a weapon that's perfect for assassination, silent, invisible, no evidence, except for the bodies, I pointed out, which look like natural deaths. That's the beauty of it. Cardiac arrest is common, happens all the time. No one investigates unless there's reason to. And who's going to suspect that someone was killed by sound? Wolfe opened his eyes. Someone intelligent, someone patient, someone with access to classified research and the technical skill to weaponize it. He turned to Render. During your work with Dr. Albrecht, did you encounter anyone who might have such capabilities? Every acoustic engineer in the country might have such capabilities, given the right resources. But the ones with access to classified research, that's a much shorter list. Make the list. I'll need access to my files, my notes, everything's at the lab. Then, that's where Archie will start. Give him the address and whatever credentials he needs. Greenpoint in October is charmless, even by Brooklyn standards. Industrial buildings that look like they're held together by rust and pessimism. Streets that smell like machine oil and old disappointments. And a general atmosphere of decay that makes you wonder if the whole neighborhood might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Albrecht Render Acoustics Research occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse that had probably been something respectable once and had given up around 9. The building's elevator looked like it predated the invention of safety regulations, so I took the stairs, 3 flights that smelled like mildew and bad decisions. The lab's door was locked, but I'd come prepared. Fritz had given me a lockpick set last Christmas. His idea of a thoughtful gift for the man who has everything except the ability to enter locked rooms legally. The lock was old, simple, and surrendered without much fight. Inside, the lab looked like a hurricane had married a tornado and had children in an electronics store. Workbenches stretched the length of the room, covered with equipment I couldn't identify. Oscilloscopes, frequency generators, signal analyzers, things with dials and meters and cables trailing off to other things with more dials and meters. Filing cabinets hung open, their contents disturbed. Papers scattered across every surface, covered with equations that might as well have been ancient Sumerian for all I understood them. And everywhere, recording equipment, tape decks, wire recorders, vinyl cutters, all of it designed to capture sound in its various forms. But here's what caught my attention. Someone had been through the place with systematic violence. The recording equipment was destroyed, not damaged, not broken by accident, destroyed with deliberate, focused rage. Tape decks had their mechanisms torn out. Wire recorders were smashed beyond repair. Even the vinyl cutters had their needles bent and motors burned out. Someone didn't want recordings. Someone didn't want evidence. I photographed everything with the Leica I kept for such occasions. Wide shots to capture the overall chaos, close-ups of specific damage, detail shots of anything that looked like it might be important. The light through the windows was weak and grey, but the film was fast and my hands were steady. In the corner, near one of the workbenches, I found a tape deck that had been overlooked in the destruction. It was older than the others, hidden behind a stack of technical manuals, and it was still running. The take-up reel turned slowly, feeding blank tape through the mechanism. Not blank, because it had been erased. Blank because it had run to the end, and was now just recording silence. I checked the tape. 3 hours worth, most of it blank, but at the beginning, maybe 10 minutes of recorded sound. I rewound the tape and hit play, keeping the volume low. Static, white noise, then voices, 2 men, arguing. Can't just ignore this, Quentin. That signal isn't random. Someone's broadcasting deliberately. That was Render's voice, younger but recognizable. I know it's not random, that's what concerns me. Albrecht sounded older, more tired. The frequency signature matches specifications from a program that was shut down 7 years ago. If someone's reactivated that research, then we need to report it. Go to the authorities. Tell them what? That we found a mysterious signal while conducting unauthorized experiments. That would go over well. Better than the alternative. Quentin, if this is what I think it is, if someone's weaponized the Lazarus coil, the tape cut off. Not because the recording ended, but because someone had stopped it. And apparently they'd forgotten to eject the tape when they destroyed everything else. I pocketed the reel. Evidence. Maybe important evidence. In the trash bin, I found more interesting fragments, torn papers, damaged notes, things someone had tried to dispose of but hadn't quite succeeded. One piece caught my eye, a partial address written in hurried handwriting. Avon Industrial Complex, Dock 7, Brooklyn. The ink was smudged, the paper torn, but the words were clear enough. A location, a specific location in Brooklyn. I added it to my collection of evidence and continued searching. Near Albrecht's workbench, I found a journal, leather-bound, worn, filled with dense handwriting that covered both technical notes and personal observations. Most of it was beyond my understanding, equations and diagrams, and references to papers I'd never heard of. But one section caught my attention, dated 2 days before Albrecht's death. Triangulation complete. Signal source confirmed. Raven Industrial Complex, Brooklyn. Frequency analysis matches theoretical specifications for Lazarus coil operation. This is not possible. The coil was never completed. The program was shut down. But the signal is real. Someone has built it. Someone is testing it. Must investigate tomorrow. Must document. If I'm right, this changes everything. That was the last entry. Albrecht had found the source, had gone to investigate, and had died before he could tell anyone what he'd found. Except he'd left this journal, left this tape, left clues for anyone smart enough or lucky enough to find them. I kept the journal. Pendergast Communications was my second stop, a storefront in the garment district that now wore a for lease sign like a badge of failure. The windows were grimy enough to be opaque, and through the glass I could see nothing but shadows and dust. I found the building superintendent in the basement apartment, a man named Jimmy Koufax, who looked like he'd had a hard life and wasn't interested in making any excuses about it. 60-something, deeply tanned even in October, with the kind of weathered face you get from spending too much time outdoors or too much time drinking, possibly both. "You're the second person asking about Pendergast this week," he said when I explained why I was there. "Popular guy for a dead man." "Who was the first?" "Some lady, elegant type, spoke with a fancy accent. French, maybe, said she was his daughter, came to clean out the shop, paid the last month's rent in cash and took everything. Everything. Every stick of furniture, every piece of equipment, every scrap of paper. Place was empty when she finished. Like Pendergast had never been there at all. You remember her name? Lisette. Lisette something French. Duchamp, maybe? Or Duclair? Something like that. Did she leave a forwarding address?" Colfax laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "Lady like that doesn't leave forwarding addresses. She leaves $100 bills and disappears, which is exactly what she did." "You're sure she was his daughter?" "That's what she said. Who else would clean out a dead man's shop?" "Who indeed?" I thanked Colfax and headed for my third stop, but my mind was already churning. A mysterious woman with a French name, no forwarding address, and enough money to pay cash for everything. That didn't sound like a grieving daughter. That sounded like someone covering tracks. I made a mental note to have Saul track down Lisette Duchamp, or whatever her real name was. Radio City was my last stop, and the most productive. The building was massive, 50 stories of Art Deco grandeur and corporate optimism, the kind of place that makes you feel simultaneously inspired and insignificant. I talked my way past security by mentioning Nero Wolfe's name, which carried enough weight in certain circles to open doors, sometimes literally, and found myself in the engineering department on the 20th floor. Russell Peck was the man I wanted to see, the nervous young engineer who'd inherited Ivan Kowalski's position after Kowalski's untimely death. He was maybe 28, thin as a rail, with thick glasses and the kind of perpetual anxiety that suggested he'd been promoted beyond his comfort level, and knew it. "Mr. Kowalski was the best," he said, fidgeting with a pencil while we talked in his cramped office. 20 years with the company. Knew every system, every circuit, every frequency. When he died, we all thought it was the stress. He'd been working 16-hour days, staying late, coming in on weekends. Management said it was dedication. I think it was obsession. Obsessed with what? A problem. An interference problem. He said someone was piggybacking on our frequency, broadcasting something underneath our regular programming, something that shouldn't be there. He spent weeks trying to track it down, convinced it was some kind of attack on the station. What kind of attack? He never said exactly, just that it was wrong, that the signal was too precise, too targeted. He tried to bring it to management's attention, but they thought he was overreacting. Equipment malfunctions happen all the time. Interference is part of the job, but Kowalski wouldn't let it go. And then he died. Yeah. Security found him slumped over his equipment one morning. Heart attack. He was 63, had high blood pressure, worked too hard. It made sense. But when I took over his office, everything was gone. His files, his notebooks, his test recordings, all of it. Management said it was standard protocol, that they'd archived everything for security reasons, but I never saw any paperwork. It was like someone came in and cleaned out his office before anyone else could look at what he'd been working on. Did you find anything? Anything he might have hidden? Peck hesitated, glancing toward his closed door as if worried someone might be listening. Then he pulled open a desk drawer and extracted a small, battered notebook. I found this behind his desk when I was moving my stuff in. It was wedged in a space between the wall and the cabinet, like he'd deliberately hidden it. Some kind of backup log, I think. Most of its technical notes I don't understand, but the last entry, he opened the notebook to the final page and handed it to me. I read Kowalski's cramped handwriting, dated the day before he died. Signal confirmed, source location triangulated. Frequency matches theoretical weapon specs from Fort Meade acoustic program, 1945. Must warn others on original project team. List in safe. Combination 371428. If anything happens to me, someone needs to know. This is not a malfunction. This is murder. I looked up at Peck. What list? What safe? I don't know about any list, but there's an old safe in the storage room, belonged to Kowalski's predecessor, been there for 30 years. Management never bothered to open it after the guy retired. If Kowalski used it, he shrugged. It's still there. Do you want to see it? Did I want to see a safe that might contain a list of potential murder victims? Did a fish want water? Lead the way. The storage room was exactly what you'd expect. Cramped, dusty, filled with obsolete equipment and forgotten files. And in the corner, covered with boxes of old invoices, was a safe, grey steel, combination lock about 3 feet high. Peck moved the boxes while I copied the combination from Kowalski's notebook. 371428. The lock opened with a satisfying click. Inside, I found papers, lots of papers, technical specifications, frequency charts, test results from experiments I couldn't begin to understand. And under all of that, a single sheet of paper with 23 names listed in neat, careful handwriting. Names I recognized, names I'd seen before. Quentin Albrecht, Harriet Calloway, Margaret Finch, Walter Pendergast, Bernard Hutchins, Angela DeMarco, all the victims Saul had identified, and more names that were presumably still alive, still breathing, still completely unaware they were on a list. At the bottom of the page, in different handwriting, fresher ink. More recent edition, someone had written, "They all knew, they all participated, they must all answer." I photographed the list, then took the original. Evidence, critical evidence. And more than that, a motive. Someone was systematically eliminating everyone who'd worked on the Fort Meade acoustic weapons program. Every engineer, every technician, every scientist who'd contributed to the Lazarus coil's development. This wasn't random murder, this was revenge. I got back to the brownstone at 2:30 in the afternoon, carrying enough evidence to connect dots that were starting to form a very ugly picture. Wolfe was in his office with Render, surrounded by more technical diagrams and reference books than any sane person should need. "Report," Wolfe commanded. I laid out everything: the destroyed lab, the tape recording, Albrecht's journal, the mysterious Lisette Duchamp, Kowalski's hidden notebook, and most importantly, the list. Wolfe examined the list with the intensity of a jeweler appraising diamonds. His finger traced each name, pausing occasionally, his lips moving silently as he made connections I couldn't see. 23 names, he murmured, 14 crossed off, 9 remaining. Mr. Render, are you on this list? Render leaned over to look, then went pale. Yes, third from the bottom. Then we have our answer. Someone is working through this list systematically, eliminating everyone who contributed to the Fort Meade program. The question is who, and more importantly, how do we stop them before they finish? I can answer the first part. Saul's voice came from the doorway. He stood there with that unremarkable face and those sharp eyes, holding a folder thick with papers. Lisa Decker, age 31, born in Cleveland as Lisa Duchesne, changed her name to Lisette Duchamp in 1946. Educated at MIT Electrical Engineering, graduated top of her class, recruited by Army Signal Corps in 1943, worked at Fort Meade until 1945, then disappeared, completely off the grid for 7 years. She's our Lisette, I said. She's more than that. I found a connection. Lisa Decker worked directly under a Dr. Marcus Wren, lead scientist on the Fort Meade acoustic weapons program. Brilliant physicist, specializing in sound-based technologies. And here's where it gets interesting. Wren had a daughter. Lieutenant Jennifer Wren, Army Signal Corps, died in 1945 in a vehicle accident involving faulty equipment. Wren blamed the Army, claimed negligence, claimed they knew the equipment was defective, and sent her anyway. Wolfe's eyes gleamed, and when the Army shut down his program, he snapped, faked his death in 1946, disappeared along with Lisa Decker. The official story is that he committed suicide. The reality, I think, is that he went underground and took his best student with him. To complete his life's work, Wolfe finished the Lazarus Coil, the ultimate weapon of revenge. But if Wren died 7 years ago, I started. Then Lisa Decker inherited his mission, Wolfe said, his research, his fury, his list of people to blame. He looked at the names again. 23 people who built a weapon that could kill from a distance. 23 people who walked away when the program was shut down. 23 people who, in Lisa Decker's mind, are responsible for Jennifer Wren's death. That's insane, Render said quietly. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but it's also logical. In a twisted, grief-stricken way, it makes perfect sense. Dr. Wren lost his daughter because of military negligence, lost his life's work because of military cowardice, and decided that everyone involved should pay the price. And when he died, Lisa Decker picked up where he left off, perfected the coil, started working through the list. 14 dead so far, 9 to go. Including me, Render said. Yes, but you're still alive, Mr. Render, which means we have time. Wolfe stood, a production that involved leverage, momentum, and probably violated several laws of physics. Gentlemen, we're going to set a trap, and Lisa Decker is going to walk right into it. What kind of trap? I asked. The obvious kind, the one she won't be able to resist. And just like that, I knew we were about to do something either brilliant or suicidal. With Wolfe, it was often hard to tell the difference until afterward. Setting a trap for someone who kills with invisible sound waves is not the sort of thing they teach you in detective school, assuming detective schools exist outside of pulp novels and the overly optimistic imaginations of police academy recruiters. But Wolfe had a plan, which he revealed to us over lunch on Wednesday afternoon with the casual confidence of a man who just solved a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. We're going to use Mr. Render as bait, he announced, cutting into Fritz's veal cutlet with surgical precision. He'll appear on a live radio broadcast, announce that he's discovered the identity of the Phantom Killer, and has evidence that will lead to their arrest. The broadcast will be scheduled in advance, advertised, made as public as possible. Render, who'd been reaching for his water glass, froze mid-motion. That's suicide. No, that's theater. Wolfe chewed, swallowed, and continued as if discussing the weather, rather than attempted murder. The killer, Lisa Decker, assuming our deductions are correct, will have 2 choices: allow you to speak and risk exposure, or attempt to kill you during the broadcast and confirm not only her existence but her method. And if she chooses murder, then we'll be prepared. Archie will take your place in the studio. You're approximately the same height and build. With proper lighting and camera angles, or rather the lack thereof, Since radio is an audio medium, the substitution will be undetectable until it's too late. I looked up from my own veal cutlet, which suddenly tasted like cardboard and regret. Come again? You'll impersonate Mr. Render during the broadcast. Read a prepared statement, answer questions if necessary, and serve as the target for the phantom frequency. Meanwhile, Mr. Render will be safely secured elsewhere, monitoring the situation with technical equipment. And when Decker tries to kill me, you'll be protected. Wolfe turned to Render. You can construct a counter-signal device? Something to disrupt the weapon's frequency? Render's hands had started trembling again, but his voice was steady. In theory, yes. If I know the exact frequency specifications, you'll have them, because Decker will reveal them when she attacks. She'll use the Lazarus coil at full power, assuming her target is the real Tobias Render, and that she needs to ensure a clean kill. That will give us the frequency signature, which you can record and analyze. Once we have that data, we can trace the transmission back to its source. There's a flaw in your plan, I pointed out. If the counter-signal doesn't work, I'll be dead. Dead people are notoriously bad at continuing investigations. The counter-signal will work. You sound confident. I am confident. Mr. Render is an expert in acoustic engineering. He understands frequency disruption better than anyone alive, with the possible exception of Lisa Decker herself. If he says he can build a defensive device, then he can. Render looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too busy calculating probabilities and survival odds to waste breath on protests. I'll need equipment, specific components, and at least 12 hours to assemble and test the device. You'll have both. Archie, call Saul. Have him procure whatever Mr. Render needs, regardless of cost. Then call Inspector Kramer and inform him we're proceeding with the operation tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow? Render's voice cracked slightly. That's less than 24 hours, which is sufficient time to prepare, but insufficient time for Decker to develop effective countermeasures. Speed is our advantage, Mr. Render. We move quickly, we control the circumstances, and we end this before anyone else dies. There was a certain logic to it, assuming you ignored the part where I was volunteering to be target practice for a sound-based assassination device. But then, logic and Wolfe often had a complicated relationship. After lunch, Render disappeared into the office with enough technical equipment to launch a satellite, while I made phone calls and tried not to think too hard about my own mortality. Saul returned at 4 o'clock with components I couldn't name. Circuit boards, capacitors, specialized microphones, things with wires and mysterious purposes. He'd also brought information. Lisa Decker's last known address was a rented workspace in the Raven Industrial Complex, Dock 7, Brooklyn. The same address from Albrecht's notes. I did a drive-by, Saul reported. The building's still operational, at least partially. Lights in some windows, signs of recent activity, but it's mostly abandoned. Perfect place to hide a weapons laboratory. Or a revenge factory, I added. Kramer called back at 5, sounding like someone had personally insulted his mother, and then set his car on fire. Wolfe, are you out of your mind? You want to deliberately provoke a killer who uses untraceable acoustic weapons, put Goodwin in the line of fire, and hope your experimental counter-signal device works. Yes. Do you have a better plan? There was a long silence. Then, no, God help me, I don't. All right, I'll arrange security at the radio station. But Wolfe, if Goodwin dies, he won't. I'm arresting you for reckless endangerment, possibly manslaughter, possibly just for being an arrogant son of a bitch who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. I don't think I'm smarter than everyone else, Inspector. I simply am. There's a difference. Kramer hung up with enough force that I heard the receiver crack against its cradle through the phone line. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of preparation. Render worked on his counter-signal device with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing brain surgery, occasionally muttering to himself in technical jargon that might as well have been ancient Sanskrit. Wolfe alternated between supervising Render's work and reading, which in his case constituted preparation because information was always valuable, and you never knew when an obscure fact might become relevant. I spent my time coordinating with Kramer's people, confirming security arrangements at WMCA radio station, and writing the script I'd be reading during the broadcast. Wolfe had dictated most of it, a carefully constructed mixture of truth and provocation designed to force Decker's hand. Good afternoon. My name is Tobias Render, and I'm about to reveal the identity of a murderer. For the past 3 weeks, 14 people have died in New York City. Engineers, technicians, scientists, all connected by their work on a classified military program during the war. The police believe these deaths were natural. They weren't. They were assassinations, carried out using an acoustic weapon called the Lazarus coil. And I know who's responsible. From there, I'd go into specifics, mention Lisa Decker by name, reference the Fort Meade program, describe the coil's specifications. Enough detail to prove I knew what I was talking about. Enough provocation to make Decker react. The goal was simple: make her angry enough to strike immediately, before she had time to think through the consequences. By midnight, Render had completed the counter-signal device. It looked like a portable radio had mated with a cardiac monitor and produced offspring that weren't sure what they were supposed to be doing. Wires snaked from a central processing unit to what looked like modified headphones, with additional components strapped to a harness that would fit under a shirt. This will detect incoming frequencies in the subaudible and superaudible range, Render explained, demonstrating how the device worked. When it registers the Lazarus coil signature, which should be distinct enough to identify, it'll broadcast a counter-frequency designed to create destructive interference. Sound waves, like all waves, can cancel each other out if the timing and amplitude are correct. Will it work? I asked. 80% certainty. And the other 20%? Let's not think about that. I'm the one wearing it. I'm going to think about it. Then think positive thoughts. Optimism has been shown to improve survival rates. That's for cancer patients, not for people about to be shot with invisible sound waves. Same principle. I tried on the device. It was bulky, but not impossible to hide under a loose shirt and jacket. The harness fit snugly across my chest, and the modified headphones were small enough to be mistaken for hearing aids if anyone looked closely. The central processing unit went in my jacket pocket, and the whole assembly weighed maybe 3 pounds. How will I know it's working? I asked. You'll feel a slight vibration when it activates, and more importantly, you won't die. Comforting. Wolfe watched all of this from his desk, Caesar at his feet, the other dogs scattered around the office in their usual protective positions. Since the attack Monday night, they'd been more alert, more watchful, as if they understood that something dangerous was happening, and they needed to be ready. Mr. Render, Wolfe said when the demonstration was complete, you've done excellent work. This device represents the difference between success and catastrophe. I trust you understand the weight of that responsibility. Yes, sir. Good. Then let's review the plan, one final time before we all attempt to sleep. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, which either meant it was brilliant or we'd missed something obvious that would get us all killed. Phase 1. Announce the broadcast. Kramer's office would release information to the press. Tobias Render, the sole surviving witness to the phantom frequency murders, would be appearing on WMCA radio at 3 p.m. Thursday to reveal the killer's identity and turn over evidence to authorities. Phase 2. Secure the location. Kramer's tactical team would sweep WMCA for any pre-positioned transmitters or devices. The building would be locked down, with plainclothes officers at every entrance and rooftop spotters scanning for suspicious activity. Phase 3. Execute the switch. I would arrive at WMCA dressed as Render, wearing his coat, his glasses, with my hair styled similarly. In the controlled environment of a radio studio, with lights low and attention focused on the microphone, the substitution would be effectively invisible. Phase 4. Broadcast and wait. I'd go on air, read the prepared statement, and wait for Decker to respond. When she did, and Wolfe was certain she would, Render would record the frequency signature from a secure location elsewhere in the building. Phase 5. Trace and apprehend. Once we had the frequency signature, Saul and Kramer's technical people would triangulate the source. NYPD units were already standing by near the Raven Industrial Complex, ready to move in once we had confirmation. Simple. Direct. With approximately 80% chance of success and 20% chance of me dying on live radio. Any questions? Wolfe asked. Well, I had several hundred, but most of them boiled down to variations of, are you sure this will work? And what happens if it doesn't? Neither of which would change anything, so I kept them to myself. No questions. Then I suggest we all get some rest. Tomorrow will be demanding, and I prefer my operatives to be alert rather than exhausted. I went to bed that night with Apollo sleeping across my doorway and my 38 under my pillow. The brownstone was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels fragile, like glass stretched too thin. Outside, the city continued its usual chaos, unaware that somewhere in Brooklyn, a woman was preparing to commit murder again. And tomorrow, we were going to stop her, or die trying. Either way, it would make for an interesting story. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of grey, overcast sky that makes you question your life choices and wonder if the universe is trying to tell you something. I ignored the universe's opinions and focused on Fritz's breakfast, scrambled eggs with chives, bacon cooked to crispy perfection, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Which seemed appropriate, considering I might be joining them soon. Render came down to breakfast, looking like he'd spent the night wrestling with mathematical equations and losing. Dark circles under his eyes, but his hands were steady, and his frequency counter-signal device was fully charged and tested. He'd run it through a dozen simulations overnight, using recorded frequencies from Albrecht's laboratory tapes. "It works," he announced, setting the device on the breakfast table next to the butter. "I tested it against every frequency signature we've collected. The counter-signal activated correctly every time, creating the proper interference pattern." "Every time being how many times?" I asked. 57. "And if the real thing is different from your simulations?" "Then we adapt. The device has automatic calibration. It analyzes incoming frequencies in real time and adjusts the counter signal accordingly. There's a 3-second lag while it calculates, but after that it should maintain protection." 3 seconds. That's a long time when someone's trying to stop your heart. "Would you prefer no protection at all?" "No. I'm just establishing expectations." I took another bite of eggs. "How long does the effect of the Lazarus coil take? If Decker hits me with full power, how much time do I have before—" Cardiac arrest typically occurs within 7 to 12 seconds of exposure, depending on the individual's cardiovascular health and the exact frequency used. The effect is cumulative. The longer you're exposed, the more severe the damage. "So I have about 10 seconds to hope your device works, and 3 of those seconds are the device figuring out what to do." "More or less." "Wonderful." Wolfe entered the dining room at precisely 8 a.m., looking like a man who'd slept soundly and had no concerns about the day ahead. He probably had slept soundly. Wolfe had the remarkable ability to compartmentalize worry, filing it away in some mental drawer labeled tomorrow's problem, and then ignoring it until tomorrow arrived. "Gentlemen," he said, settling into his chair with the usual groaning protest from the furniture, "today we end the Phantom's campaign of revenge. I trust everyone understands their role. I wear the device, read the script, and try not to die," I summarized. "Succinct. Mr. Render?" "I monitor from the engineer's booth, record the frequency signature when Decker attacks, and provide technical support for the counter-signal device." "Excellent. And I will remain here, coordinating with Inspector Kramer and waiting for confirmation of Lisa Decker's location. When we have her, the police will move in and arrest her. Clean, simple, effective. Unless something goes wrong," I pointed out. "In which case we adapt. Flexibility is the hallmark of successful investigation, Archie. That and stubbornness, mostly stubbornness." After breakfast, I dressed in Render's spare coat, similar cut to his usual style, dark grey with a faint pinstripe. His spare glasses, which were cosmetic rather than corrective, just clear lenses in wire frames. His hat, which was too small but would do in a pinch. Looking in the bulletproof mirror in the front hall, I saw a reasonable approximation of Tobias Render staring back at least, reasonable enough to fool someone watching from a distance or through a broadcast. The counter-signal device went on next. Harness strapped across my chest, central processing unit in my jacket pocket, modified headphones tucked under my shirt collar, where they'd be invisible but could pick up and cancel incoming frequencies. Render adjusted the settings, ran one final diagnostic, and gave me a thumbs up. "You're as protected as I can make you," he said. "That's not as reassuring as you think it is. Would a lie make you feel better? Probably not." At 1:30 p.m., Saul arrived with news. Kramer's people swept WMCA top to bottom. No pre-positioned transmitters, no suspicious equipment, nothing that could be used to amplify or direct a signal. If Decker's going to strike, she'll have to do it remotely from her Brooklyn location. "Which gives us the triangulation advantage," Wolfe noted. "Excellent. Archie, you'll leave at 2 p.m. Take the Heron sedan. Saul will drive. You shouldn't be distracted by traffic. I'm going too, Render announced. No, Wolfe said flatly. With respect, Mr. Wolfe, if something goes wrong with the device, Archie needs someone there who can fix it. I need to be in that engineer's booth. You also need to not be visible. Lisa Decker may have surveillance on WMCA. If she sees the real Tobias Render arriving, then I'll arrive in disguise. Different coat, different hat, different glasses. I can be just another technician going to work. Decker won't recognize me. Wolfe considered this, his fingers drumming once on his desk. Finally, very well, but you'll stay in the engineer's booth at all times. No exposure, no heroics, no unnecessary risks. Agreed. At 2 p.m. sharp, Sol pulled the Heron up to the front door. Mars and Apollo flanked the entrance, watching as we left, their presence both protective and ominous. Caesar stayed with Wolfe. Of course, the Alpha never left his master's side unless ordered. The drive to WMCA took 20 minutes, navigating through Manhattan traffic that seemed determined to turn a simple journey into an epic quest. Saul drove with his usual competent efficiency, never hurrying, but never wasting time, threading through gaps in traffic that I wouldn't have attempted with a motorcycle, let alone a full-size sedan. Render sat in the back, checking and rechecking his equipment with the obsessive focus of a man who knew that any mistake might be fatal. Not for him, for me, which was generous of him to worry about, though I'd have preferred if the worry wasn't necessary in the first place. "You're sure this will work?" I asked for what was probably the 15th time that day. 80% sure, and the other 20% has gotten steadily smaller with every test. We're probably up to 85% now, maybe even 90. That's not how statistics work. Close enough for field work. We arrived at WMCA at 2:30, 30 minutes before the broadcast. Kramer met us at the back entrance, looking like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. Stress will do that to you, especially when you're coordinating a multi-agency operation designed to catch a killer who uses invisible weapons. "Everything's set," he said, leading us through security. "We've got 20 officers in the building, another 30 in unmarked cars within 2 blocks. Rooftop spotters, tactical teams standing by. If Decker tries anything, we'll have her location in minutes. If Mr. Goodwin survives that long," Wolfe's voice crackled through the radio Kramer was carrying. Wolfe was back at the brownstone, monitoring everything from his office, probably with a beer in hand. "Inspector, I trust you've positioned medical personnel appropriately." 2 EMT teams on standby. "Yes, though I'm still not convinced this is a good idea." "Noted. Nevertheless, we proceed. Archie, do you have the script?" I patted my jacket pocket. Memorized, actually. Figured it would sound more natural than reading. "Excellent. Mr. Render?" "Equipment operational," Render said, checking his monitoring devices. "Ready to record." We moved through the building, utilitarian corridors painted in institutional beige, fluorescent lights that hummed with their own frequency, the kind of space that made you grateful you didn't work there permanently. The studio was on the 3rd floor, a soundproofed room about 15 feet square, with acoustic tiles on every surface and a single microphone on a desk facing a glass window that looked into the engineer's booth. Russell Peck was there, the nervous engineer from Radio City who'd helped me earlier. Kramer had recruited him to run the actual broadcast, figuring we needed someone who understood the equipment and wouldn't panic if things went wrong. "Mr. Goodwin," Peck said, shaking my hand. His palms were damp. I've tested all the equipment. Everything's working properly. Normal broadcast range, normal power levels, no unusual interference detected." "Yet," I amended. "Yet," he agreed. Render set up in the engineer's booth with Peck, positioning his monitoring equipment where it could record everything without interfering with the broadcast. Kramer's people had already installed additional recording devices, multiple redundancies, because if we were going to risk my life for data, we'd better make damn sure we got usable data. At 2:55, Peck gave me the 5-minute warning. I settled into the chair facing the microphone, adjusted Render's glasses on my nose, and tried to look like someone who was about to reveal a killer's identity, rather than someone who was hoping not to die in the next 15 minutes. The counter-signal device was active. I could feel it vibrating gently against my chest, a reminder that I was wearing experimental technology that might or might not work. The modified headphones were in place, invisible under my shirt collar. The central processing unit hummed quietly in my pocket. Everything was ready. 2 minutes, Peck said through the intercom. Kramer stood outside the glass booth, radio in hand, coordinating with his teams. Saul was somewhere in the building, probably on the roof with the spotters, watching for any sign of Lisa Decker. Render hunched over his equipment, fingers poised to record the moment the phantom struck. And Wolfe was back at the brownstone, listening to everything through the radio link, probably already several moves ahead of the rest of us. 1 minute. I took a breath, thought about Diana, collapsed on Wolfe's office floor, thought about 14 dead engineers and 9 more waiting to die, thought about Lisa Decker, wherever she was, sitting at her transmitter and preparing to kill again. 30 seconds. The red on-air light blazed to life, and I began to speak. Good afternoon. My name is Tobias Render, and I'm about to tell you about a murder weapon you can't see, can't hear, and can't escape. The words came easily once I started. Wolfe's script was well written, and I'd memorized it thoroughly enough that I could deliver it naturally, without stumbling. I laid out the whole story, the mysterious frequency, Dr. Albrecht's death, the pattern of cardiac arrests among engineers connected to the Fort Meade program, and finally the name I knew would provoke a reaction. The killer is Lisa Decker, formerly of the Army Signal Corps, student of Dr. Marcus Wren, and now a murderer who's used the Lazarus coil to kill 14 innocent people. I have evidence, recordings, documents, technical specifications, and I'm turning it all over to the police tonight, unless of course she wants to stop me first. I paused for effect. But that would require revealing her location, her method. Her? The sound hit. Not a sound, exactly, more like pressure, a feeling of immense weight pressing down on my skull from the inside. My vision blurred, my heart stuttered, missing a beat, then racing to compensate. The world tilted sideways, and I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Through the glass, I saw Render's hands flying across his equipment, saw Peck's terrified expression, saw Kramer shouting into his radio. And I felt the counter-signal device activate. It vibrated hard enough that I thought my chest might crack. A high-pitched whine filled my ears, not from the broadcast, from my own equipment, fighting back against the Lazarus coil's frequency. The pressure in my skull eased slightly, just enough to think, just enough to hold on. 3 seconds. Render had said there'd be a 3-second lag. I counted. 1, 2, 3. The counter-signal locked on. The pressure vanished. My heart steadied, my vision cleared, and suddenly I could breathe again, deep and full, like surfacing from underwater. I was still alive. In the booth, Render was shouting something, pointing at his equipment. Kramer was on his radio, coordinating, and through it all, I sat at the microphone, still broadcasting, still speaking. That was it, I said, my voice remarkably steady considering I'd just been attacked by an invisible weapon. That was the Lazarus coil. And we've got you, Lisa. We've got your frequency signature, your location, and in about 5 minutes we're going to have you in custody. I wasn't sure if she could hear me, if Decker was monitoring the broadcast or just blindly firing her weapon. But if she was listening, I wanted her to know. We'd won. The Phantom had revealed herself, and now she was going to pay for it. The Raven Industrial Complex looked like something out of a nightmare, assuming nightmares took the form of abandoned warehouses in Brooklyn rather than monsters under beds. The sun was setting, golden light bleeding across broken windows and rusted metal as Kramer's tactical team surrounded Dock 7. I wasn't there, of course. Wolfe had ordered me back to the brownstone immediately after the broadcast, citing something about unnecessary exposure to additional risk. And you've done enough stupid things for one day, Archie. But Saul was there, and he had a radio, and Wolfe had insisted on an open channel so he could monitor everything from his office. Which meant I was sitting in the red leather chair, listening to police procedure through crackling static, while Wolfe drank beer and pretended he wasn't anxious about the outcome. All teams in position. Kramer's voice came through clearly. Building is surrounded. No visible activity inside, but thermal imaging shows heat signatures on the second floor. At least one person, possibly 2. Proceed carefully, Wolfe said into the radio. Lisa Decker is armed with a weapon that requires no line of sight. If she suspects you're coming, she can broadcast her frequency and incapacitate your entire team. We're aware. Teams are wearing experimental ear protection, military-grade noise-cancelling headphones, modified to block extreme frequencies. Should give us some defense. Should isn't sufficient, Inspector. It's all we've got. A pause. Static. The sound of boots on concrete. Breaching front door, Kramer reported. 3, 2, 1. The sound of splintering wood came through the radio, followed by shouts of police. Show your hands. More static. Footsteps echoing in empty spaces. And then, second floor clear, found the transmitter. Describe it, Wolfe commanded. Saul's voice came through. He'd gone in with the tactical team, because Saul could go anywhere and nobody questioned it. It's impressive. Center of the room, mounted on a metal frame, looks like the pictures from Albrecht's notes. Concentric rings of copper wire wrapped around a crystalline core, glowing faint blue, and all around it workbenches covered with equipment, amplifiers, frequency generators, targeting systems. This is a complete laboratory. Is Decker there? Negative. Room's empty. But there's evidence she was here recently. Coffee still warm, papers scattered like she left in a hurry. She ran, I said, as soon as she realized the attack failed. Or she's waiting, Wolfe countered. Mr. Panzer, examine the walls, look for photographs. Silence. Then Saul again. Found them. Dozens of photos, all tacked to the walls. Engineers, technicians, these must be the victims. Every one of them marked with a red X. How many unmarked? 9, including Render. Then she's not finished. She fled rather than face capture, but she'll try again. Inspector Kramer, secure the Lazarus coil and all associated equipment. Dismantle it if necessary. I want that weapon neutralized. Already on it. We've got Army engineers en route. They'll handle the technical details. Kramer's voice was steady but grim. Wolfe, we found something else. A journal. Detailed notes about every victim, their routines, their locations, their vulnerabilities. Decker's been planning this for years. Find her, Wolfe said flatly. Use the journal to identify her associates, her resources, her next likely target. She's wounded now, cornered, and that makes her dangerous. We've got an APB out, her photo distributed to every precinct. She won't get far. But she did. 3 days passed with no sign of Lisa Decker. Kramer's people searched her apartment, a sparse studio in Queens that looked like it had been occupied by a ghost. No personal effects, no photographs, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived there, just a bed, a table and equipment for monitoring radio frequencies. They searched her known associates, a short list consisting mostly of electronics suppliers who'd sold her components without asking questions. None of them had seen her since the failed attack. They searched transportation hubs, hotels, rooming houses, nothing. Lisa Decker had vanished as completely as she'd appeared. On Friday, Saul reported his findings. She had multiple identities, at least 4 that I've confirmed, bank accounts in different names, safe deposit boxes scattered across 3 states, and enough cash reserves to disappear for years if she wanted. But she won't disappear, Wolfe said. We were in his office, me, Wolfe, Render and Saul, reviewing the case while Fritz prepared lunch. She's invested too much. 14 years of planning, 14 successful kills, and now we've taken her weapon and exposed her identity. She'll be furious, humiliated, and determined to finish what she started. Meaning she'll come after me again, Render said quietly. He'd been staying at the brownstone since Monday, occupying the south room and slowly transitioning from terrified to merely anxious. Progress, of a sort. Yes, you're still on her list, so are the other 8 surviving engineers, which means we can't simply wait for her to strike. We must anticipate her next move and intercept it. How? I asked. She could be anywhere. Not anywhere. Somewhere with access to specialized equipment. The Lazarus coil was custom built, but it required resources, power supplies, frequency generators, acoustic calibration tools. She can't simply purchase new equipment without leaving traces. Saul nodded. I'll check suppliers, especially those dealing in military surplus. If she's building a new transmitter, she'll need components. Do so, and Archie, visit the remaining 8 potential victims, warn them, provide them with protection if necessary, and most importantly, gather information. Someone among them knows something about Lisa Decker, even if they don't realize it. Find the connection. I spent Friday afternoon and Saturday tracking down engineers, most of whom reacted to news of their impending assassination with varying degrees of disbelief and terror. I left each one with Kramer's card, instructions to report anything suspicious, and the vague reassurance that we were working on it. Which was true, in the sense that we were working on it, even if we had no idea what it was or how to stop it. Sunday evening, the break came. Saul called at 7:15 p.m., his voice tight with suppressed excitement. Found a purchase order. Medical equipment supplier in Newark sold a portable frequency generator to a woman matching Decker's description. Cash transaction. Gave a false name, but the manager remembered her because she asked specific questions about acoustic applications. When? Wolfe demanded. Yesterday morning. She's rebuilding. Location? That's the interesting part. The manager said she asked about power requirements, specifically whether the generator could run off a building's electrical system or if it needed a dedicated power source. When he said it needed dedicated power, she asked for recommendations about generators that could be concealed. She's going mobile, I said. Building something she can transport and deploy anywhere. Or building something that looks like normal equipment, Wolfe corrected. Remember, the previous Lazarus coil was stationary, requiring significant infrastructure. If she's learned from that limitation, she'll create something more flexible, something that could be positioned anywhere near her target. Render had been quiet during this conversation, but now he spoke up. There's a weapons conference this week, Audio Engineering Society convention at the Waldorf Astoria. 3 days of presentations, exhibitions, technical demonstrations. Every acoustic engineer in the Northeast will be there. We all turned to look at him, including, Render continued, his face pale, at least 6 of the remaining names on Decker's list, including me. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. When does it begin? Tomorrow morning. Opening ceremony at 9. Running through Wednesday afternoon. Perfect. A target-rich environment for Decker. And a controlled setting for us. Inspector Kramer will provide security. Mr. Render will attend. Obviously, since refusing would alert Decker that we're anticipating her. And Archie, you'll be there as well, watching for anyone who matches Decker's description. Out of thousands of people at a convention. Yes, I trust you'll manage. Mr. Panzer, coordinate with hotel security. I want surveillance on every entrance, every conference room, every possible location where Decker might position her weapon. Already on it. Excellent. Gentlemen, we're approaching the end game. Lisa Decker is cornered, desperate, and committed to finishing her list. She'll make her move at this convention, and when she does, we'll be ready. Monday morning at the Waldorf Astoria was chaos rendered in formal wear. Engineers everywhere, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all wearing name tags and carrying briefcases and discussing acoustic phenomena with the kind of enthusiasm most people reserve for sports or religion. The convention had taken over the entire second floor, transforming elegant ballrooms into forests of equipment demonstrations and poster presentations. Kramer had assigned plainclothes officers to every major entrance, plus roaming patrols inside the convention itself. Saul was somewhere in the crowd, invisible as always, watching for threats. And I was following Render, who'd reluctantly agreed to attend his scheduled presentations while wearing a modified version of his counter-signal device, smaller, less obtrusive, but theoretically just as effective. Theoretically being the operative word. The morning session was benign. Presentations about sound absorption in concert halls, advances in microphone technology, research into acoustic ecology, nothing that suggested impending murder. Lunch was in the grand ballroom, 500 engineers eating chicken cordon bleu and discussing frequency response curves. I sat with Render, scanning faces, looking for anyone who might be Lisa Decker in disguise. And that's when I saw her. Not Decker, but someone I recognized from the photographs in Doc 7. A woman, maybe 50, silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a name tag that read Dr. Patricia O'Donnell, Hendrix Acoustics. She was sitting alone, picking at her lunch, her eyes distant. Patricia O'Donnell, one of the names on Decker's list, one of the 9 still alive. I moved to her table. Dr. O'Donnell? Archie Goodwin. May I join you? She looked up, startled. Yes, of course. I'm here with Tobias Render. I wonder if I could ask you a few questions about a matter of some urgency. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. This is about the frequency murders, isn't it? The ones Detective Kramer warned us about? Yes. You know Lisa Decker? Knew. Past tense. I worked with her at Fort Meade during the war. Brilliant engineer, completely devoted to Dr. Wren and his acoustic weapons research. When the program was shut down, she disappeared. I always assumed she'd left the field entirely. She didn't leave. She continued Wren's work, perfected it, and now she's killing everyone who was involved in the original program. O'Donnell went pale. Why? Revenge. Wren's daughter died in 1945. Faulty equipment, military negligence. Wren blamed everyone connected to the program. When he died, Decker took up his mission. That's insane. Yes, but it's also true. You're on her list, Dr. O'Donnell. You need protection. I have protection. Kramer's people assigned me a security detail. She gestured toward a plainclothes officer standing near the entrance. I'm being careful. Good. But I need to ask, did Decker have any particular grudge against anyone on the project team? Anyone she blamed more than others? O'Donnell thought for a moment. Dr. Wren blamed Theodore Masterson. He was the program director, the one who made the final decision to shut everything down. Wren felt betrayed by him specifically. If Decker inherited that grudge, where's Masterson now? Here. He's giving the keynote address this afternoon. 3 o'clock, main ballroom. The future of acoustic technology in defense applications. She paused. Ironic title given the circumstances. I thanked her and headed for the nearest phone. Called the brownstone. Fritz answered. Put me through to Wolfe. We have a problem, I said. Theodore Masterson, the program director who shut down Redstone, is giving a keynote speech this afternoon. Main ballroom, 500 people in attendance. If Decker wants to make a statement, that's where she'll do it. Agreed. Inform Inspector Kramer. Have him increase security around the ballroom. And Archie, stay close to Mr. Render. If Decker strikes during the keynote, she'll target multiple victims simultaneously. The ballroom is large enough that her weapon could affect dozens of people. Understood. I found Kramer, explained the situation. He pulled additional officers from other parts of the hotel, positioned them at every entrance to the ballroom, and had his technical people sweep for transmitters. They found nothing, which meant either Decker wasn't there, or she was very good at hiding her equipment. At 2:45, I took my seat in the main ballroom, 3rd row, center aisle, with clear sight lines to both the stage and the exits. Render sat beside me, his counter-signal device active and monitoring. Kramer stood at the back, radio in hand, coordinating with his teams. The room filled quickly. Engineers settling into plush seats, programs rustling, conversations humming at that frequency, peculiar to academic gatherings. On stage, a podium waited, flanked by the Waldorf's excellent sound system. Sound system. I stood up. What is it? Render asked. The sound system. Decker doesn't need to bring her own transmitter. She just needs to hijack the existing equipment. I was already moving toward Kramer, threading through the crowd. Inspector, have your people check the stage. Check the speakers, the amplifiers, the mixing board, anything that could broadcast sound. Kramer understood immediately. He barked orders into his radio, and officers moved toward the stage, just as Theodore Masterson stepped up to the podium. Masterson was an imposing man in his 70s, tall, distinguished, with white hair and a voice that carried natural authority. He adjusted the microphone, smiled at the assembled engineers, and began his speech. Good afternoon. It's an honor to address this distinguished gathering. I reached the stage just as the technician pried open the main mixing board's housing. Inside, nestled among the legitimate equipment, was a small black box, no bigger than a deck of cards, but with enough wires and components to be unmistakably foreign. That's it, Render said, right behind me. That's her transmitter, piggybacking on the hotel's sound system. When Masterson speaks, it'll broadcast the killing frequency directly through the speakers. The technician reached for it. Don't touch it, Render shouted. If you disconnect it wrong, it might activate automatically. Let me. He didn't get to finish. The box activated. Not with sound, with silence. The kind of silence that feels like pressure, like the world holding its breath. And then through the ballroom speakers, a frequency so precise, so pure, so absolutely wrong, that my counter-signal device screamed its warning vibration and my vision went dark at the edges. Around me, people collapsed. Masterson at the podium, O'Donnell in the second row, 3 other engineers I recognized from the list. They went down like puppets with cut strings, clutching their chests, gasping. Render was moving, fingers flying across the mixing board, trying to shut it down. Kramer's people were evacuating the room, but the doors seemed impossibly far away, and moving was like wading through honey. My counter-signal device locked on. The pressure eased. I could breathe, but others couldn't. "Get the power," I shouted, my voice sounding distant through the ringing in my ears. "Cut the main power to the building." Someone must have heard, must have acted, because suddenly the lights went out. The speakers went silent. And in the darkness, broken only by emergency lighting, I heard the sound of 500 people gasping for air. The aftermath of the Waldorf incident resembled controlled chaos, if chaos could ever truly be controlled, which is doubtful. EMT teams flooded the ballroom, treating the 5 engineers who'd collapsed from full exposure to the Lazarus coil's frequency. Miraculously, all of them survived, battered, traumatized with cardiac rhythms that would make cardiologists weep, but alive. Theodore Masterson was conscious, and conscious enough to be furious, which the attending physician assured us was actually a good sign. If he's angry, his heart's still working, the doctor said, with the kind of dark humor that comes from seeing too much tragedy. Kramer's technical people dismantled the black box Decker had hidden in the mixing board, carefully this time, with Render supervising every step. Inside, they found components worth more than my annual salary, miniaturized frequency generators, targeting circuits that could identify specific voice patterns, and a trigger mechanism set to activate when Masterson began speaking. She was going to kill him on stage, Render explained while we waited for the ambulances to clear. Broadcast the frequency through the hotel's sound system, make it look like the equipment malfunctioned. Masterson drops dead mid-speech, maybe takes a few others with him, and nobody's the wiser. Perfect crime, except we caught it in time. "Barely," I said. My hands were still shaking after effects of the frequency exposure, or adrenaline, or the realization that I'd been about 10 seconds away from joining the casualty list. Kramer approached, looking like he'd aged another decade in the past hour. "We've got the device, we've got evidence, but we don't have Decker. She planted this thing, walked away, and vanished. Again." "She had help," Saul said, appearing from the crowd with his usual perfect timing. Hotel security footage shows a maintenance worker accessing the ballroom's equipment room early this morning. Woman mid-30s wearing a hotel uniform. She was inside for about 8 minutes. Plenty of time to install the device. "Did you get a clear image?" Kramer demanded. "Clear enough. It's Decker. Different hair, different clothes, but the facial structure matches. She had access credentials, probably forged, but good enough to pass security. She knew the hotel's systems, knew when the room would be empty, knew exactly where to place her device for maximum effect." Wolfe's voice crackled through Kramer's radio. He'd been monitoring everything from the brownstone, and I could hear the controlled fury in his tone. "Inspector, she's not finished. She planted one device. There may be others." "Other devices?" "Other targets. The conference runs through Wednesday. 9 names remain on her list, and she's demonstrated both the capability and determination to strike again. You must assume she's prepared additional attacks." Kramer looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find grounds for disagreement. "All right, I'll have my people sweep every conference room, every ballroom, every piece of equipment in this hotel. If there's another device, we'll find it." "And in the meantime, what about Decker herself?" I asked. "She's out there somewhere, probably watching to see if her attack succeeded. She might even still be in the hotel." "Possible, but unlikely," Wolfe said through the radio. "She's intelligent enough to recognize the risk of proximity. More probable is that she's monitoring from a safe distance, perhaps with another frequency detector, or through news reports. She'll learn her attack failed, and she'll adapt." "Adapt how?" "By becoming more desperate, more reckless. Until now she's operated with careful planning and precision. But we've disrupted her twice, the broadcast attack, and now this. Her confidence is shaken, her resources are depleted, and her list of targets is dwindling. When cornered animals become desperate, they make mistakes. So we wait for her to make a mistake? Kramer said skeptically. No, we force her to make one. Mr. Goodwin, return to the office. We're going to draw Lisa Decker out of hiding, and we're going to end this, tonight. I got back to the brownstone at 6:30 p.m. to find Wolfe in his office, surrounded by papers, maps, and technical diagrams that suggested he'd been planning something elaborate while I was dodging acoustic assassination attempts. The dogs were on high alert, Caesar at his usual post near Wolfe's desk, Mars prowling the hallway, Apollo and Minerva positioned at strategic points throughout the house. Diana, fully recovered now, sat near the door to the front room, ears pitched forward, watching everything with those intelligent eyes. Report, Wolfe commanded without looking up from whatever he was studying. I gave him the full account. Masterson's near death, the device in the mixing board, Saul's discovery of Decker's maintenance worker disguise, and Kramer's ongoing search for additional planted weapons. Excellent work, all of you, Wolfe said when I finished. But insufficient. Lisa Decker will not simply surrender because we foiled 2 of her attacks. She'll regroup, reformulate, and strike again. Therefore, we must remove that option. By offering her a target too tempting to resist. He looked up, his eyes gleaming with that particular light that meant he'd solved something the rest of us hadn't even understood was a puzzle. Lisa Decker wants revenge. She wants to complete her list. And most of all, she wants to punish those she holds responsible for Dr. Wren's suffering. What would she do if presented with all 9 remaining targets in one location, under circumstances that appeared vulnerable? She'd attack, I said. But how do we? I stopped. Oh no, you're not suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I am. We're going to hold a meeting here, at the brownstone, tomorrow evening. All 9 surviving engineers from Decker's list, plus Mr. Render, plus ourselves. We'll announce it publicly. An emergency gathering to discuss protective measures against the phantom frequency killer. We'll make it appear hastily organized, poorly secured, an opportunity Decker cannot ignore. And when she attacks, we'll be prepared. Mr. Render has constructed additional counter-signal devices, enough for everyone present. We'll have Inspector Kramer's tactical team positioned nearby, and we'll have surveillance equipment recording everything. When Decker broadcasts her frequency, we'll trace it immediately and apprehend her. You're using 9 people as bait. I'm using 9 people who are already in danger as the means to eliminate that danger permanently. The alternative is waiting for Decker to pick them off one at a time, which seems considerably less appealing. I couldn't argue with the logic, though I wanted to. What if she doesn't take the bait? She will, because she's running out of options, out of time, and out of patience. She's killed 14 people already. She's committed everything to this vendetta. She cannot walk away now. Saul arrived at 7 with updated information on hotel security sweeps. They'd found 2 more devices, one in a smaller conference room, another in the hotel restaurant, both designed to target specific individuals on Decker's list during scheduled events. She planned this meticulously, Saul reported. Multiple devices, multiple contingencies, multiple opportunities. If one attack failed, she had backups. We've found 3 so far, but there could be more. There won't be time for more, Wolfe said, because tomorrow evening, we're going to end this. Contact the 9 remaining engineers. Inform them of the meeting here at 8 p.m. Tuesday. Explain that it's a security briefing, that protective measures will be provided, and that their attendance is strongly recommended. Make it clear that declining would be inadvisable. They'll ask questions. Answer them honestly. Tell them we're setting a trap for Lisa Decker. Tell them they're the bait. If they choose to participate, excellent. If they decline, note their names and recommend Inspector Kramer provide individual protection. And the publicity angle? Leak it. Not to major newspapers, too obvious, but to trade publications, engineering journals, places where someone monitoring the acoustic community would see it. Make it appear accidental, as if someone let slip information that should have remained confidential. Decker has demonstrated access to various information networks. She'll find out. Render emerged from the south room where he'd been working on additional counter-signal devices. He looked exhausted but determined. I've completed 8 more units. They're smaller than the original, less powerful, but should provide adequate protection against the Lazarus coil's frequency. If Decker broadcasts at full power, Everyone wearing one of these should survive. Should? I asked. 95% certainty now. I've refined the design based on real-world data from the 2 previous attacks. The counter-signal is faster, more responsive, better calibrated. That's more reassuring than 80%. Marginally. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable warmth. One of those October days that makes you think summer might reconsider leaving, at least temporarily. Fritz spent the morning preparing the office for evening guests, arranging additional chairs, ensuring everyone would fit comfortably. Wolfe supervised from his desk, occasionally offering suggestions that were really commands disguised as preferences. The 9 engineers arrived throughout the afternoon, each one escorted by one of Kramer's plainclothes officers. I recognized several from the convention. Dr. Patricia O'Donnell, her silver hair now showing streaks of stress-induced white. Theodore Masterson, still looking shaken from his near-death experience. And 7 others whose names I'd memorized from the list. Robert Kingston, a frequency specialist from Bell Labs. Margaret Chen, acoustic engineer from Columbia University. James Holloway, former Navy research scientist. Diane Foster, who'd worked with Wren at Fort Meade. Kenneth Yates, electronics designer. Arthur Pembroke, retired Army engineer. And finally Helen Voss, who'd been Wren's assistant before Decker arrived. They filled the office, occupying every available chair, standing when necessary. All of them nervous, all of them aware they were risking their lives by being here. "Thank you for coming," Wolfe said once everyone had settled. It was 8:05 p.m., 5 minutes past the announced meeting time, which meant Decker would have had time to position herself, to prepare her attack, to believe she had the element of surprise. "You're all here because Lisa Decker wants you dead," Wolfe continued bluntly. "She holds you responsible for the destruction of Dr. Marcus Wren's life work, for his daughter's death, and for what she perceives as a betrayal of scientific progress. She has killed 14 of your colleagues. She will kill you as well, given the opportunity." "Then, why are we here?" Kingston demanded. "Why make ourselves targets?" "Because you're already targets. The question is whether you prefer to be hunted individually or to stand together and end this threat. We've brought you here to do the latter. This room is equipped with counter-signal devices that will protect you when, not if, but when, Lisa Decker attempts to broadcast her killing frequency. Mr. Render, please distribute the protective equipment." Render moved through the crowd, handing out the modified counter-signal devices and explaining how to wear them. Most of the engineers understood the technology immediately and adjusted their units with professional efficiency. A few needed help, which I provided. "These will work?" Masterson asked, his voice still raw from Monday's attack. "They've worked twice already," I assured him. 95% success rate. And the other 5%? Let's focus on the 95. By 8:30, everyone was equipped and positioned. Kramer's tactical team was in place outside, 24 officers in unmarked vehicles, ready to move the moment we had Decker's location. Saul was on the roof with direction-finding equipment, triangulation gear, and enough technical apparatus to track a frequency signature across half of Manhattan. And in the brownstone's basement, Render had set up his master recording station, equipment designed to capture every electromagnetic signature, every frequency, every whisper of sound across the entire spectrum. If Decker broadcast, we'd have her. All we needed now was for her to take the bait. Wolfe continued speaking, outlining the history of the Redstone program, explaining the Lazarus coil's technical specifications, describing Decker's methodology. It was all information these engineers already knew, but that wasn't the point. The point was to appear vulnerable, occupied, distracted. The point was to be a target. At 8:47, Diana whined. It was a soft sound, barely audible, but in the tense silence of the office, it might as well have been a gunshot. Her ears flattened against her skull. The other dogs reacted immediately, Caesar rising to his feet, Mars's growl building from deep in his chest, Apollo moving toward the windows, Minerva positioning herself between the gathered engineers and the door. They felt it before we did. "It's coming," Render said, his voice tight. His hand went to his own counter-signal device, the frequency. "She's broadcasting." And then I felt it, that familiar pressure, that sense of weight pressing down from inside my skull. But this time the counter-signal activated immediately, almost before I registered the threat. The pressure vanished, replaced by the gentle vibration of the protective device. Around me, 9 engineers experienced the same sequence: discomfort, then relief, as their counter-signals locked on and negated the attack. Decker was trying to kill us, and we were still alive. Mr. Panzer. Wolfe's voice was sharp. Location. Saul's voice came through the radio, crisp and professional. Got it. Signals coming from a vehicle, moving north on 10th Avenue. Black panel van, no markings. She's mobile, broadcasting as she drives past. Intercept immediately, Wolfe commanded. Kramer's voice. Units in pursuit. Air support en route. She's not getting away this time. Through the office windows, I saw the tactical vehicles pulling out, lights flashing, sirens wailing. The hunt was on. And this time, the Phantom had nowhere left to hide. The chase lasted 17 minutes. We monitored it through Kramer's radio, listening as police units tracked the van through Manhattan's evening traffic, calling positions, coordinating intersections. Decker was heading north, apparently trying to reach the George Washington Bridge and escape into New Jersey. She never made it. At 161st Street, 2 police cars boxed her in. The van swerved, jumped a curb, and crashed into a concrete barrier with enough force that the impact echoed through the radio transmission. Suspect vehicle disabled, came the report. Driver's side airbag deployed. Subject appears conscious but disoriented. Moving to apprehend. Silence. Then suspect in custody. Repeat. Suspect in custody. Lisa Decker is under arrest. In Wolfe's office, 9 engineers let out a collective breath. Several of them were crying. Masterson sat heavily in his chair, his face in his hands. Dr. O'Donnell simply stared at nothing, processing the realization that she was going to survive. Wolfe reached for his beer, took a long swallow, and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Gentlemen and ladies," he said quietly, "it's over. Lisa Decker's campaign of revenge has ended. You're safe now." "Thanks to you," Helen Voss said. She was a small woman, maybe 60, who'd been silent throughout the evening. "You risked your own home, your own life to save us." "I risked very little. The counter-signal devices eliminated most of the danger, and Inspector Kramer's planning eliminated the rest. The risk was calculated and acceptable." "Still," Voss insisted, "thank you." Wolfe waved it away with the discomfort of a man unused to gratitude. "The fee will suffice as thanks. Mr. Goodwin will provide each of you with an invoice." "Wolfe," I said, "read the room." "I am reading the room. The room contains 9 people who hired me to solve a problem. I solved it. Payment is customary in such arrangements." Despite everything, the stress, the fear, the near-death experiences, several of the engineers laughed. It broke the tension, reminded everyone that life would continue, that the world would return to normal. Eventually, Kramer brought Lisa Decker to the brownstone at 11:30 am, at Wolfe's insistence. "I want to see her," he'd said. "I want to understand." She came in handcuffed, flanked by 2 officers, looking smaller and more ordinary than I'd expected. The brilliant engineer who'd turned sound into a weapon looked like a tired woman in her 30s, with dark circles under her eyes and a defeated slump to her shoulders. They sat her in the red leather chair. Wolfe studied her for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked. Not demanding, not accusing, simply curious. "You know why," she said. Her voice was flat, empty of affect. "You know what they did. I know what you believe they did. But belief and truth are not always identical. They killed Dr. Wren's daughter. Faulty equipment, negligent maintenance, and they knew. They knew it was dangerous, and they sent her anyway, because schedules mattered more than safety. And this justified killing 14 innocent people? They weren't innocent." For the first time, emotion crept into her voice. Anger, grief, something that might have been tears if she'd had any left. "They built a weapon, all of them. They designed it, tested it, perfected it. And when they saw what they'd created, when they realized how dangerous it was, did they destroy it? No. They buried it, classified it, left it sitting there for anyone to find. As you did," Wolfe noted. "As I did." Dr. Wren died still working on it, still trying to perfect his daughter's legacy. I finished what he started. I made the Lazarus coil work, and I used it to show them all what they'd built. A perfect murder weapon. Silent, invisible, unstoppable. Except it was stopped, I pointed out. Twice, and you were caught. She looked at me, and in her eyes, I saw not regret, but exhaustion. I knew it was only a matter of time, but I finished the list. 14 names, 14 people who built that weapon and walked away. They're gone now. That's what matters. 9 survived, Wolfe said. I know, you saved them. She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who'd forgotten what happiness felt like. I underestimated you, Mr. Wolfe. Dr. Wren always said pride was a scientist's greatest weakness. I should have listened. Dr. Wren, Wolfe said carefully, was a brilliant man consumed by grief. His daughter's death destroyed him, but killing others would not have brought her back. It never does. I know, but it made the pain stop. She closed her eyes. For a little while it made the pain stop. Kramer moved to take her away. As she stood, she looked back at Wolfe one final time. Do you know what the worst part is? She asked. I'm good at what I do. Really good. If I'd spent the last 7 years building things instead of destroying them, I might have changed the world. Dr. Wren would have been proud. He would have been horrified, Wolfe corrected. A good teacher wants students to surpass them, yes, but not in the ways that matter least. She had no answer to that. They led her away. The office emptied slowly. The 9 engineers departed with their counter-signal devices and Kramer's assurances that they could return to their lives without fear. Saul collected his equipment from the roof. Render packed his technical gear, preparing to return to his own apartment now that the threat had passed. Only Wolfe and I remained, sitting in the office while Fritz cleaned up the debris of the evening. Extra chairs, empty glasses, the detritus of a case concluded. She was right, you know, I said, about pride being a weakness. Hers destroyed her. Among other things, Wolfe agreed. Grief, rage, the conviction that revenge would bring peace, all delusions, all common, all ultimately fatal. At least it's over. This particular frequency of madness, yes. But there will be others. There always are. Man's appetite for destruction exceeds his capacity for wisdom, Archie. We build weapons, then wonder why people die. We create tools of murder, then express shock when those tools are used. It's almost comical if it weren't so tragic. Philosophical tonight, aren't we? Tired tonight, and aware of how easily this could have ended differently. He looked at Diana, still resting near his chair, now completely recovered. When she collapsed, I realized something. I've spent years insulating myself from the world. Bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, dogs to guard the perimeter. But some threats can't be stopped by walls and locks. Some threats are invisible until they're already inside. Hence the counter-signal devices. Hence the acknowledgement that absolute safety is an illusion. We can prepare, we can defend, but ultimately we survive through vigilance, intelligence, and occasionally acceptable risk. You took such a risk at WMCA, and again at the Waldorf. I'm grateful. Coming from Wolfe, that was practically a declaration of love. I decided not to ruin the moment by acknowledging it too directly. All part of the service, I said, though I wouldn't mind if the next case involved slightly less invisible weaponry and slightly more conventional murder. I like being able to see what's trying to kill me. Noted. I'll screen future clients accordingly. Liar. Yes, but an honest liar, which is the best kind. We sat in companionable silence while Fritz finished cleaning and retired to his own quarters. The brownstone settled into its nighttime rhythms, the dogs patrolling, the bulletproof windows reflecting the city lights, the sound of traffic filtering in from West 35th Street. Normal sounds, safe sounds, the frequencies of ordinary life continuing despite everything that had happened. And in that moment, surrounded by the familiar comfort of Wolfe's office, I realized something. We'd stopped a killer who used invisible weapons, saved 9 lives, and solved a case that most people didn't even know was a case. Not bad for a week's work. Though I still thought my hazard pay should have been more than $2,000. 3 weeks later, I read in the paper that Lisa Decker had pled guilty to 14 counts of murder. No trial, no media circus, just a quiet acknowledgement of guilt and a life sentence that meant she'd never leave prison. The Lazarus coil had been dismantled by Army engineers and its components scattered to 3 different secure facilities, ensuring it could never be reassembled. The 9 surviving engineers returned to their lives, though I heard from Saul that several of them had changed careers, moved to different fields, decided that acoustic research held too many ghosts. Theodore Masterson retired from the conference circuit. Dr. O'Donnell published a paper on the ethical responsibilities of weapons researchers. Helen Voss started teaching, passing on her knowledge to students who might use it more wisely than her generation had. And Tobias Render, he stopped by the brownstone one afternoon in November, looking healthier than when I'd first met him. Less haunted, more present. "I wanted to thank you properly," he said, sitting in the red leather chair that had become oddly famous among New York's engineering community. "And to return this," he handed Wolfe a check. The full fee, paid in full, with a bonus that made even Wolfe's eyebrows rise slightly. "Excessive," Wolfe said. "Appropriate," Render corrected. "You saved my life, multiple times, and you stopped a killer who would have continued killing for years if left unchecked. That's worth more than money. Nevertheless, I'll accept it. Archie, deposit this." "Already planning to," I said. After Render left, Wolfe sat with his beer, staring at nothing in particular, lost in thought. The dogs were in their usual positions, Caesar near his desk, the others scattered throughout the brownstone like living security systems. "Archie," he said finally, "make a note. If anyone calls inquiring about cases involving invisible weapons, experimental frequencies, or acoustic assassination devices, tell them I'm not interested. You know the next case will be completely different, and somehow even weirder. Undoubtedly. But I can hope for conventional crime, poison perhaps, or a simple shooting, something civilized." "You have a strange definition of civilized." "I have an accurate definition of civilized. The problem is that civilization and humanity rarely align." I couldn't argue with that. Outside the bulletproof windows, Manhattan continued its eternal chaos, traffic and sirens and voices and music, all the normal frequencies of urban life. The phantom frequency was over, relegated to police files and engineering cautionary tales. Lisa Decker would spend the rest of her life behind bars, and the world would move on, mostly forgetting that for a few brief weeks someone had turned sound into a weapon and nearly gotten away with it. But we'd remember. Wolfe and I, Fritz and the dogs, Saul and Kramer and all the others who'd been part of stopping it. We'd remember that some threats come wrapped in silence, that revenge is a frequency that destroys both transmitter and receiver, and that the most dangerous weapons are often the ones you can't see coming. We'd remember. And we'd be ready if anything like it happened again. Though I sincerely hoped it wouldn't. My ears were still ringing. The phantom frequency was a lie masquerading as science, a weapon disguised as grief, and revenge disguised as justice. But the victims were real as the pain that drove their killer. In the end, all frequencies return to silence. The question is what we choose to broadcast before they do. Man's appetite for destruction may exceed his appetite for wisdom, but occasionally, just occasionally, intelligence and preparation can tip the balance. At least for one night, in one brownstone, on one street in Manhattan, where 5 Dobermans stand guard, and a genius drinks beer and solves impossible problems. That's worth something, maybe even worth the hazard pay. Archie Goodwin, from notes found in Nero Wolfe's files, November 1952,